Hi everyone, welcome back to Dragonfly Joes. This is the channel and the page where we can go back and look at some of the original G.I. Joe figures that were re-released in 1982. If you're familiar with the history of G.I. Joe, they've been around for quite some time, but it was around 1982 where we got the reboot of G.I. Joe with all of the colorful figures and all of the stories and cartoons and comics that came along with that original series. And so that's what we're going over here on Dragonfly Joes. We are looking at these alphabetically and year by year. So that means we're still in the year of 1982, and going alphabetically, we are now at COBRA Officer or COBRA Soldier. We're putting these both together in this series to be able to look at and differentiate between two of the most common and most seen characters that we find in G.I. Joe. Now, when it comes to the original 13 Joes, the figures consisted more of just those good guys. There were also the two bad guys who were both called the Enemy. And though they shared the same name on the front of the blister cards or the packaging, that was the Cobra Trooper and the Officer, they were distinguished as having different ranks in the file cards on the back of the package. And so to look at these differently, we're going to start with the Cobra Trooper and be able to look at them and see how he differentiated from the Cobra Officer, which we'll get to soon enough. Starting off with the Cobra Trooper. He came with a Dragunov SVD sniper's rifle, and he was considered to be the soldier. When we look at his file card and looking at the back of the package, it says that when it comes to his name, it is unknown. Obviously, there was many Cobra soldiers that existed, and they were just simply known as the Enemy. As far as their birthplace, it was various countries because these Cobra soldiers could come from anywhere around the world. Their primary military specialty was infantry. That means they were boots on the ground, they were the soldiers, they were the men that were out there on the battlefield. Their secondary military specialty was sabotage, or known as the Sabos, that were out there trying to do all the bidding, doing all that they could in order to win their battles against G.I. Joe. Their ranking as the troopers, they were considered to be an E4, which is either a corporal in the army or something of the equivalent. So far, when we've looked at G.I. Joe, we've seen that many, at least all of them so far, also carry this ranking of an E4. So when we look at the Cobra Soldier, the Cobra Troopers, we can see they are pretty well experienced, which is something that we typically don't see, especially when we're watching things like the cartoon. When we read the file card, it says this about the Cobra Soldiers, that they are one of the nameless, faceless legion of COBRA Commander. Each Cobra is highly skilled in the use of explosives and all NATO and Warsaw Pact, small arms, sabotage, and the martial arts. They are qualified in the Scorpion, the VZOR-61 machine pistol, or a Dragunov SVD sniper's rifle, which is very similar to that which we see in the Soviet era of 1963. Now there's a little bit of a controversy with that particular weapon because this sniper's rifle only holds about 10 rounds, and it seems to be an odd choice of weaponry for a common soldier who's not a sniper. Some speculate that the weapons were accidentally switched when these figures were distributed, but then if that's true, then the artwork for these soldiers and officers are also wrong. But I digress. As we look at some of the other expertise that they have, it was also with an Uzi submachine gun, and lastly, an M16 rifle. And on the back of all of these packages, we always get a quote from someone anonymously telling us a little bit more about the character. On this one we read, Cobras swear absolute loyalty to their fanatical leader, COBRA Commander. Their goal? To conquer the world for their own evil purpose. These were released in 1982, and at the beginning of G.I. Joe comics and later on in the cartoons, they were filling most of their time fighting against the G.I. Joes. Troopers, they always served as the foot soldiers of the COBRA organization, and usually they're seen as legions of uniformed soldiers, nearly all of them masked to appear anonymous. And they were widely diversified according to their specialities and their functions. These are what we might be considered the typical generic COBRA soldiers equipped with just conventional military gear. They were prominently featured on both the cartoon and the comic series, both portrayed unfortunately as bumbling and slightly cowardly when it came to actual combat. But when we take a closer look at the COBRA soldiers, we'll begin to realize just how dangerous they could actually be. Because while they were serving as the basic infantrymen for the organization, they were also cross-trained to be experts in at least 2 other supporting skills. Cobra troopers are mercenaries, they're criminals, they're people who are basically angry at the world who have taken up Cobra's offer to be able to find wealth and power within that organization. Now, these Cobra figures that were released in 1982 and 83, they were the first of what's known as an army builder for G.I. Joe. By that we mean that collectors would buy as many as they can find in order to create their own Cobra army. And most of these Cobra troopers resemble what's known as the typical blue shirt. It isn't until years later that some of these specialized troops began to appear in other aspects. And these Cobra troopers are subtly different, distinct from the Cobra officers by their blue helmet, which is attached to the figure, as a typical helm, but the comic version looked more like Nazi Waffen SS styled helmet. The helmet that the troopers wear is heavily stylized and incorporating elements of the Nazi Germany Wehrmacht or Stahlhelm steel helmet from World War II. In the comics, they can even be seen as offering a very similar salute as the soldiers of Nazi Germany. We can find this in issues number 8, which was also not written by Larry Hama. And so, as we mentioned, they wore a shirt with black straps over the shoulders holding a grenade launcher with a pistol grip. Maybe this is something known as an M203. They also carried a garrote wire or piano wire, which is found in Hasbro's original artwork, and the use of this is a bit controversial because some look at this as a weapon or a tool for strangling. Or maybe it was a carabiner, which is a coupling link used by mountain climbers, something that would link on so that they could hold on to, and it's molded onto their right shoulder. What those modes really are has been debated, but it is interesting that they were never used ever since. On the left arm are bullet-shaped moldings that are possibly grenades for the launcher. They also all wear gloves, and the pants with the black belt also have pouches on them. They all wear that black face mask, again reflecting the mentality of Cobra, that individuality and identity no longer matters because this cause is greater than any one person themselves. They have blue down the legs with a pocket on the right and also a bayonet on the left side, wearing knee pads and detailed boots. And of course, all of the Cobra soldiers or troopers had the red Cobra insignia on their chest. We'll sometimes see a difference in the eyebrows of these Cobra soldiers. Some of them are red, some of them are black, and some people have suggested that the earlier versions were the red while the soon later versions were in black. But neither the Cobra trooper nor the Cobra officer came with a backpack. Well, it becomes pretty obvious that these basic recruits are meant as filler characters. They were not able to make a major impact since sometimes even a dozen of them cannot even bring down a single G.I. Joe. Cobra troopers were seen as the bottom tier of Vipers, who can opt for additional training which would enable them to transfer to specialized units, focusing on a specific military specialty. And some of those troopers became units and renamed and reorganized into other units, or sometimes customized their chain of command, which allowed for a unique Viper designation to be distinct for their leaders. In fact, the Viper Pilot, which was released in 1983, is an exact mode of this trooper with the piano wire included, but the only difference was that he had a silver sigil instead of a red one. These Viper Pilots are extremely rare and pretty expensive if you're looking for one today, because they only came with the Cobra hang glider, and if you didn't grab the hang glider, you didn't have the figure. A figure that is technically called a Cobra Squad Leader version 1 is pretty much a perfect example of the standard trooper. The funny thing is, the inclusion of 2 scars that came across his eyes was done as an Easter egg for old fans. Those scars turned that figure into a unique character and not just a generic infantryman. In the early issues of the Marvel comic, writer Larry Hama didn't have very many characters to work with, and so he created a few. And one of his original creations was Scarface, a Cobra officer or trooper with very distinct scars across his face. Now I say officer or trooper, and I'll explain why in just a bit, but even though that figure wasn't marked as a unique character, fans already knew who he was or was meant to be. A question lingers as to whether or not Scarface was a trooper or an original officer, because the Scarface version, which came packaged with 5 other troopers in a Toys R Us exclusive 6-packs, he is dressed as a trooper. So maybe he was just a standout trooper that Hama used in order to tell his stories. As the toy line grew, each year there was new specialized troopers that were added to Cobra's roster, and those standard troopers and officers were seen less and less from 1982 and 83. Now, let's move on to the Cobra Officer. The Cobra Officer was included with an AK-47 assault rifle. Again, when we look at their file card, we see this, that their name is unknown, simply known as the enemy. Birthplace, again, could be various countries. Their primary military specialty was infantry, the same as the soldier, but their secondary military specialty was artillery and intelligence. The other difference that we will notice is their grading or their ranking, which is known as an 04, which is either a major in the Army, a lieutenant commander in the Navy, or something of that equivalence. When it comes to the officer, it says, Cobra officers are frontline fighters who lead Cobra attack units into battle. Many are also believed to be operating as spies at defense plants, nuclear power facilities, etc. All are martial arts experts, masters of disguise, deceit, and demolitions. They are qualified experts in the AK-47 assault rifle, also called the Kalashnikov Model 1947. They are also experts in the PM-63 machine pistol, an M16, and an Ingram M11 submachine gun. And again, the quote that comes with the Cobra Officer is this: Cobra officers are dedicated to destroying G.I. Joe and the American way of life. Beware, they are extremely dangerous enemies. Now, these Cobra officers were available early on in G.I. Joe in a couple of different ways. First of all, with the Cobra Missile Command Headquarters. That JCPenney exclusive 3-pack, we explained this earlier on, especially when we were talking about COBRA Commander in our previous video, how fragile that was, very hard to find. And if you wanted a Cobra officer, that was one place you could find it. Another place was in a JCPenney exclusive 3-pack, which also came with the mortar matching G.I. Joe's short fuse mortar, except this one came for Cobra. Now, the silver logo on the Cobra's officer's chest was something that was very distinct and let you know that this was the officer, not a typical soldier. But when it came to the figure, the toy itself, it scratched off very easily because of the silver paint. I don't know, the makeup or the way that it was made, it just did not last as long as the red insignias. So if you find a Cobra officer without a silver Cobra logo, more than likely that figure has seen some wear and the logo has worn away. We wonder just how much of a rank they really had. Their only control is over other Cobra troops, and none of them really come close to the uppermost Cobra hierarchy. Although we're not really shown how they're recognized to become officers, they must have had some leadership training in things like air traffic control, artillery spotting, infantry leadership. Ultimately, even Cobra forces must have some form of military structure in order to keep their ranks together and to keep moving forward with a purpose. When we look at the figure of the Cobra officer, we can see that it does come with the same blue non-removable helmet, but this time with a chevron on the front. The blue shirt with several pouches and pants with black straps. And another key feature that is different is that they are the ones without the knee pads. They also came with a ceremonial looking dagger on the right, very much like that of Cobra Commanders, and they also have the black faced mask. They also come with black gloves, which is different from the Cobra Soldier. They have a belt and plain black boots, unlike those of the Cobra Soldier. They also have a gray trim on the straps and a white insignia on their chest, again, making it very easy and distinct to be able to differentiate them from a typical soldier. And they're also carrying their AK-47, of which I here have the accessory pack versions of both the sniper rifle and the AK-47, because again, these were very hard to find once they were lost. And so yeah, we have accessory packs to let everybody know I don't have the originals. And still, as we mentioned with the officer, the trooper also comes with no backpack. In 1984, the exact mold for the Cobra officer was reused for what's known as the Stinger driver of a Cobra vehicle that doesn't come out for another year or two. And in 1989, the same mode was used again for the Python Patrol Trooper. And so we can see that this look for the Cobra soldier and the officer was very distinct, and everyone knew who was the good guy and who was the bad guy. And as we watched in the cartoons, yeah, they do take on different roles. We see many more Cobra soldiers and a few Cobra officers working against G.I. Joe, trying to do the best they can for their Cobra Commander, but unfortunately, if we watch the cartoons, we see them failing miserably and bumbling, almost embarrassingly. But if you do read the comics, you can see they were a much more potential threat to the G.I. Joes and the areas that they were invading. And so if you want to take a better look at maybe the potential of these martial arts experts, these weapons experts, the comics is where you would want to go. If you like to be entertained by just guys who are afraid and tripping over their own bootstraps, then the cartoon is where you would want to go. But either way, these figures are iconic. And so whenever we look at G.I. Joe, we do recognize that the enemy, Cobra, is the ones that they are fighting against. And they have legions of troops who are willing to do Cobra Commander's bidding, and yet all anonymously. And so army building is something that became so popular at the beginning of these collections, and even today, to be able to put together your Cobra army to take on G.I. Joe. They were a force to be reckoned with, and they were looking to take you out by sheer numbers. And so that's going to cover it for today when we're talking about the Cobra soldiers and the Cobra officers. What have you noticed? Anything different that stands out to you when it came to one or the other? Which did you prefer? Actually, I like the silver sigil. I love the way it stands out against the blue on the Cobra officer, but it's really hard to find, and it's a shame that it rubs off so easily. But of course, that red logo seems to be the actual symbol for Cobra. When I think of Cobra, I think of red sigil, but that silver just pops for some reason for me, and I just really enjoy the Cobra officer. But you gotta have one or the other, you gotta have them both, and all of that. Your collection wouldn't be complete without having them both alongside Cobra Commander. I hope this was something that you could take something away from and be able to enjoy those figures, and we're going to keep on going in alphabetical order in the year of 1982. So who's next? Can you figure it out? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe, click that bell for notifications. We are working on these as best as we can to be able to put this content out for you to be able to enjoy and remember G.I. Joe 1982, 1983, and on it goes. Alright, so thanks for watching. Hope to see you again soon, and Yo Joe, we'll see you next time. Take care.